Hello everybody and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips. And the first thing I'll do is just a couple of announcements as always on Tuesday. This summer we are doing offering the Diet Lifestyle Intervention course through the Wellness Form Institute with the celebrity instructors. Some of you know that we do this every couple of years and we're interested in when it was going to happen. So if you would like to take that course and be in a teleclass with people like Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Alan Goldhammer, Dr. Ralph Moss, and the list of Dr. Peter Bregan, the list goes on and on. This is the time when you want to take the class because it won't happen again this way for another couple of years. So if you want information, it's posted on our website, wellnessformhealth.com, and you guys know that you can always email me at pampopper@msn.com. Be happy to chat with you that way and even set up a time to talk with you and send you the course catalog. We have some package offers where you can take the Diet and Lifestyle course plus a couple of other things at a deeply discounted price. And if you've already taken the Diet and Lifestyle course and you're saying, gosh, but I'd love to listen to the celebrity instructors, we have a package where you can just do that part of it if you would like. So summer is almost here, thank God, because I don't know how much longer I can deal with being in the cold and being on a treadmill instead of running outside. Really prefer the outdoor running. So summer's almost here, thankfully, and that's when we will start. So I think the first class is on June 5th or something like that. So that's the announcement for this week. Couple things that come up in our correspondence and the things that you post on the YouTube channel. And once again, I'll reiterate this. Some of you complain that you post something and then your comment isn't approved and up right away. On Friday mornings, that's when I do the approvals. And I missed one Friday a couple weeks ago because I was in Copenhagen and I just didn't want to do that from Copenhagen. I wanted to enjoy the city and the conference and all the other things going on there. But generally speaking, Friday morning, that's when I read the comments and approve them. And so sit tight. If you didn't swear at me and criticize my ethnicity and my appearance and all the other stuff I talked about, your comment will probably be approved. It's just not going to happen until Friday, okay? Another thing that comes up is I've gotten a couple of comments from some of you about, gosh, isn't some of this material old? I mean, I went and looked at the references and gosh, you're citing a study that was done in 1947 and shouldn't we be looking at something that's more recent? New is not always better. In other words, what is important is not the date that the study was published. What's important is the study design, the conflicts of interest, the length of the follow-up. I mean, there's so many considerations as to what is important that really don't have anything to do with the date that the study was published. And of course, the preponderance of the evidence. So a new study, there's no single study that's the game changer. I remember having a conversation with somebody who was talking about a woman who was conducting a study on the use of the paleo diet to reverse autoimmune disease. I said, well, it really won't make much difference what it says. And she found that shocking. The point that I was making is we have hundreds of studies showing the relationship between a diet based on animal foods and high in fat and the relationship to causation of autoimmune disease, and an awful lot of studies showing that changing the diet makes a big difference in the outcome. One of the biggest studies done was Roy Swank's study that involved over 5,000 MS patients, some of whom were followed for as long as 34 years. So one study published next year, not going to undo all that, okay? So if this is something that confuses you, like why isn't a single study important and why is a study that's done in 1947 still valid, then take the research and writing course we offer, or join and take our real basic 201 course, which is an introduction to how to look at research information and sort it out. And then you'll see exactly what we're talking about. By the way, recently there has been more misbehavior in terms of stuff that's published in medical journals than ever went on 50 years ago. So a good argument can be made that the stuff that's older is actually better. And that kind of goes to introduction to what I'm going to talk about today. Last week I did a couple of video clips on what went on in Copenhagen, and I'm going to continue that this week. And for today, I want to talk about Kim Witczaks Story. I knew of her because she is a frequent caller on Dr. Bregan's radio show, and I'm a frequent guest on Dr. Bregan's radio show, and I try to listen to as many of the recordings of the ones I'm not on as possible. And so I knew about her, I just never had met her or heard her speak. And so I'm going to tell you the story that she told. And for all of these presentations that were done in Copenhagen, when I got home, I not only had my notes from their talks, but I went online and I documented everything. And there's so much material online. And it's not that I was questioning anybody who made a presentation as much as there was far more documentation to be had for the claims that they were making about things that was really interesting to read. In fact, in several instances, I had to make myself stop and go on to the next thing on my list. So here goes. Kim Witczak was a happily married advertising executive getting ready to start a family back in 2003, and her husband, Woody, was an outgoing, gregarious, and really smart guy who had just gotten a job, his dream job, in fact, as sales manager, vice president of sales for a startup company he was pretty excited about. The job was stressful. He was having some trouble sleeping, so like a lot of people, he made an appointment with his regular doctor, and his doc prescribed Zoloft, off-label for insomnia. It's an antidepressant drug. Kim and Woody didn't question the doctor's advice. After all, Zoloft was an FDA-approved drug, and it was prescribed by a trusted medical doctor. Well, Woody was given a free sample pack, which was provided by his doctor, and the doctor got it from the drug company, Pfizer, and the pack automatically doubled the dose of Zoloft from 25 milligrams to 50 milligrams after the first week, which Kim and Woody didn't know. Well, Kim was out of the country for the first period of time when Woody was taking the drug. She was very distressed to come home from a business trip and find her husband literally in the fetal position on the kitchen floor, clutching his head and claiming that he was losing his mind and his head was outside of his body looking in, and he begged her for help. She didn't know this at the time, but in addition to this, he was also experiencing several very well-known side effects of the drug, including night sweats, diarrhea, trembling hands, anxiety, and akathisia. She calmed him down and then called the doctor, who reassured her and said that sometimes it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get used to the drug and that this really wasn't a problem since he'd only been taking it for a while. Woody told his wife he was looking forward to find a way to, quote, beat the feeling in his head. Shortly after this, he was found hanging from a rafter in the garage. He committed suicide. Well, Kim reports that from the start, her husband's suicide just didn't add up for her. And when she was discussing it, people said, well, he must have been depressed or he had some history of mental illness, and that wasn't the case at all. This was a healthy guy who had no history of mental health issues at all. He wasn't suicidal. He was, in fact, pretty excited about his new job, and he didn't have any health issues. So she decided to investigate a little bit further and found out that increased risk of suicide is a known side effect of SSRI drugs, and specifically Zoloft. So Kim filed a lawsuit against Pfizer, which ended up being settled out of court. I'll come back to that in a minute. Shortly after she filed, an interesting thing happened. The Bush administration started blocking lawsuits by other consumers and their families, claiming that, and these consumers were claiming the same thing as Kim, prescription drugs or devices had resulted in an injury to them or to a family member. The administration claimed that consumers cannot recover damages for injuries if the products were approved by the FDA, and that allowing consumers to sue would, quote, undermine public health and encourage, quote, lay judges and juries to second-guess experts at the FDA. Now, at this point in time, my blood's starting to boil. This wasn't part of her presentation. This is part of what I found online when I started looking into it. Furthermore, the Bush administration alleged, if consumer lawsuits were to succeed, good products might require stronger warnings, God forbid, right? Which would discourage their use, or they could be removed from the market, depriving patients of beneficial treatments. I guess like the one that killed Woody. The administration succeeded in blocking a case in a federal appeals court in Philadelphia, which I find absolutely despicable. The administration's brief stated that the FDA was uniquely qualified to determine when federal law should supersede state law. In a brief in another case, the administration claimed that, quote, it is inappropriate for a jury to second-guess FDA's scientific judgment on a matter that is within FDA's particular expertise. The Bush administration actually joined Pfizer in opposing a lawsuit filed by a California woman who also reported that her husband committed suicide after starting to take Zoloft. The administration stated that federal officials saw no need for a warning on the label and that a false warning could deprive patients of, quote, possible life-saving treatment. Of course, Pfizer issued a statement claiming that there was no scientific evidence of a causal relationship between Zoloft and suicide. In another case, the government claimed that restrictions on advertising for Paxil, quote, would overly deter use of a life-improving medication. Now, this unique ability that the FDA has to evaluate things like this is bought and paid for by the drug companies. It's estimated that in 2018, the drug companies gave the FDA close to $800 million in they call them user fees for evaluation of their drugs. And of course, you all know that money wouldn't influence the FDA's decisions about anything, right? I mean, come on. So yeah, they're uniquely qualified, all right. They're the type of uniquely qualified that almost $1 billion will buy you. The state in which Witczaks lives, Minnesota, has a duty to warn requirement for products sold within the state. During Witczaks' trial, Pfizer moved for summary judgment, and here are a few of the claims made by Pfizer and how the court ruled. And this is where, this again, she didn't cover in her presentation, but I got online and read the documents, and I couldn't believe it. It is hard to believe that people can be show this amount of callous disregard for human life and for other human beings. These people should rot in hell. I'll just tell you my opinion about it right now. So first of all, Pfizer claimed that conforming with the state's duty to warn regulations and including a warning about increased suicidality would have been a federal violation since the FDA did not require that warning on the Zoloft label at the time. In response, the court ruled, thankfully it seemed like there was a good judge involved, that there was, quote, no duty to use the FDA label verbatim. The ruling against Pfizer also stated that, quote, FDA regulations explicitly permit defendant to unilaterally strengthen its warning label at any time without regulatory pre-approval. I mean, can you imagine this? They almost admitted that they knew that the drug increased suicidality, but because the FDA didn't make them put it on the label, it would have been a violation of law for them to do it. The court also said this particular regulation was promulgated precisely to allow drug makers to quickly strengthen label warnings when evidence of new side effects are discovered. Pfizer claimed that warning that SSRIs increased suicidality would have rendered the label false and misleading, and in direct conflict with the misbranding statute, and that warning of a link between Zoloft and suicide would have, quote, frustrated Congress's goal of ensuring the scientific validity of drug label information. I mean, in what universe do these people do this kind of stuff? Pfizer claimed that failure to warn laws, in essence, pressure drug companies to use unsubstantiated warnings in order to avoid lawsuits and deter patients from using effective drugs. The court countered in its ruling that failure to warn laws do not pressure manufacturers to make false statements, but rather give drug companies every incentive to warn of risks as they are discovered before FDA action is taken. The court furthermore noted that on March 22, 2004, the FDA issued a public health advisory recommending that SSRI labels be modified in order to reflect an increased risk of suicide. In other words, after Kim's husband killed himself, the FDA made the regulation, and what Pfizer was essentially saying is that until the FDA mandated it, they would have been violating the law if they had put it on the label, even though they seemed to have known at the time that it was an issue. Pfizer asked the court to find that Congress intended to negate state consumer protection laws that are designed to provide remedies for consumers who are harmed by, quote, dangerous products and deceptive marketing. Pfizer also claimed that too many warnings dilute the efficacy of warnings and people just stop paying attention. Yeah, that's right. If you tell them too many bad things about the drug, they don't stop paying attention. They stop taking the drug, and that's just plain bad for business. The court denied Pfizer's motions for summary judgment and motions to strike. Internal documents obtained during the trial showed that Pfizer's executives knew well that akathisia and suicidality were side effects of Zoloft. Kim's lawsuit was settled on February 24, 2006, and the terms are confidential, and she said during her presentation in Copenhagen that the settlements are always confidential, which is one of the reasons why more people don't know about these cases. Now, I looked into this issue of suicide and when the drug companies knew about it, so I'll tell you what I was able to find out independent of this whole episode that I'm telling you about. The side effects of SSRI drugs, including increased risk of suicide, weren't disclosed at the time that the drugs were approved due to scientific fraud and misconduct. A Cochrane review of 70 trials with over 18,000 patients showed that there were limitations in study design and discrepancies in reporting, which led to serious underreporting of harms like suicide. The researchers were only able to obtain data on 32 out of the 70 trials and reported that suicide attempts were termed emotional liability or worsening depression. The data were not available for the rest of the trials, leading one Cochrane reviewer to state, quote, "I'm actually kind of scared about how bad the actual situation would be if we had the complete data," end of quote. Another study showed that 1/3 of meta-analyses of antidepressant studies were written by employees of the drug companies, and that these analyses were 22 times less likely than those written independently to include negative statements about the drugs. Another analysis showed that drug companies exaggerated the efficacy and underreported the harms of Paxil when prescribed for adolescents. According to Joanna Moncrief, a psychiatrist at University College London, quote, "They are not reported in the published literature, we know that, and it appears that they are not properly reported in clinical study reports that go to the regulator and form the basis of decisions about licensing." In 2004, the FDA ordered a black box warning to be added to package inserts for antidepressants, stating that they increase the risk of suicidal thoughts and behavior in children and adolescents up to 24 years of age. And they also ended up, subsequent to that, issuing a warning for adults in suicide as well. Well, in response to her horrific experience, Kim has become a national drug safety advocate and speaker. That's how she ended up being a presenter in Copenhagen. In 2016, she was appointed to a voting position as consumer representative on the FDA's Psychopharmacologic Drug Advisory Committee. She had a lot to say about how those meetings go. She generally votes no. She's an active member of the Washington, D.C.-based Patient, Consumer, and Public Health Coalition, which represents the interests of patients and consumers in healthcare and FDA-related legislative issues. So she's turning the terrible thing that happened to her into something productive to try to help other people. Representatives of the law firm that represented her were there at the conference as well. I enjoyed meeting them. People with a high level of integrity who even sometimes take pro bono cases when necessary in order to try to address the wrongs that I talk about every week on this channel and the things that were talked about specifically in Copenhagen. So I would imagine you're as horrified as I am about this. I mean, I have had a long time to think about this. The conference was a couple weeks ago, and I'm still feeling pretty horrified about all of this. And I arrived pretty jaded at this conference to begin with. It takes a lot to make my jaw drop, but this kind of does. So anyway, hit the subscribe button as usual. Pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you on Thursday with more news.